of the Passion Pod. How many people here? I see one hand. Sandra, okay, great. So yeah, please do join us. We'd love to have you. And this is a learning and growing space. I always say I'm not a grown man, I'm a growing man. I try to learn new things, and I'm constantly learning new things. And so we all have our own perspectives and information that we know and can share. And so this space is designed for us to come together and to have discussions and enrich our understanding of the implications of animal agriculture for our world and for the environment. So yeah, we talk about a different topic usually every month. So far, we've talked about water use. We've talked about land use. We've had meetings about lab-grown meat. We've covered a lot of different things already. So this month, I thought it was really timely to talk about the new merchants of doubt, because this report just came out in July. And I don't know how many people have had a chance to look at the executive summary. There was a link in the email that we sent out. There was an executive summary about the new merchants of doubt. So I don't know how many people had a chance to look at that. Hope you did. It'll help us in our discussion. And you can download the full report, and I would encourage you to do that. It's very it's very extensive. It's about 250 pages, and it goes into great detail about the new merchants of doubt. So before we talk about the new merchants of doubt, who were the old merchants of doubt? Any guesses? Yeah, Frank.
I'm guessing it's the meat and dairy industry, the egg producer lobby, the dairy lobby, and sadly, probably the FDA.
Well, I think those are, by this article's interpretation, they would consider those the new merchants of doubt. But even going back further than that, what are the industries that were like the original, the old merchants of doubt, that planted seeds of doubt about their products? Any ideas?
Tobacco.
Yes.
The tobacco
Rita.
industry.
The tobacco industry, yeah, they're one of the old merchants of doubt for sure. And they were highly successful for many years, right, in encouraging people to smoke. And they had a lot of tactics that they used to obfuscate the impact of doing what it was doing to people's health, right? And what about another old merchant of doubt? It has to do with climate change. Frank?
I'm thinking the sugar lobby. I mean, they use a ton of water to make sugar cane, and they've told us for years it gave you energy and it was good for you.
Yeah.
And drugs and alcohol.
Go ahead, say it again.
And
Yeah.
drugs and alcohol.
For sure. But in this study, the new merchants of doubt, they basically pointed out two other industries, which I'm assuming that they're calling the old merchants of doubt. So we've talked about one of them being tobacco. The other is fossil fuels, right? I mean, fossil fuels led a misinformation campaign, right? That convinced us that their products weren't harming the earth. And, recently memos have been released showing that the internal memos that the fossil fuel industry knew as early as the 1970s, what their products were doing and going to do to the earth. And so what did they do? They pivoted and invested in renewable energies, right? No, they didn't. They doubled down on on fossil fuels, and they led, like I said, a misinformation campaign. They funded studies. They convinced a great number of people that the climate wasn't changing and that this was a hoax. And of course, the good news about both of these industries, the fossil fuel industry and the tobacco industry, is now I think most people know that those industries were and are harming the earth, right? And we're savvy enough that we know that these industries are not looking out for the public good; they're looking out for their bottom line, and they're very reluctant to change their business practices into anything that would benefit, the majority of people. In fact, they often do things that kind of greenwash their activities. So like fossil fuel industry, they will diversify into some renewable energies, right? And that makes them look like they're actually doing something good. And it gives them kind of it's a kind of a greenwashing tactic. They're still producing just as much emissions through fossil fuels, but they're now diversifying into some renewable energy. And the study showed that the meat and dairy industries are following some of the same plays. And why would the meat and dairy industries be doing some of the same things that the fossil fuel industry and the tobacco industry did? Why are they following that same playbook?
It worked.
It worked for a while until it didn't, right? So it just delays the inevitable, and that's one of the tactics that this study talks about is delaying. But the reason why it seems so similar is the meat and dairy industry has hired the same PR firms to represent them that represented tobacco and the fossil fuel industry. So these are some of the oldest PR firms in the world, and the meat and dairy industries have hired them to basically run campaigns that were similar to what they did for the fossil fuel industry and for tobacco to delay and distract and derail changes to the industry. So that was the three main points that this article talked about, is that the tactics that the industry uses to distract us, to delay change, and to derail efforts to bring about changes. So I'm looking down at my notes. Sorry about that. So this is really problematic because scientists have said that emissions from animal agriculture need to peak by, when do you think that they need to peak by?
They need to what?
Peak.
The greenhouse gas emissions from animal agriculture, I see Rita put in 2030. Well, actually, they say that the emissions from animal agriculture need to peak by 2025. So that's next year. And we need to see a rapid, yeah, Robert said yesterday, I agree with you. We need to see a rapid decline in emissions in high-income countries like the global north, basically. We need to drastically reduce our emissions beginning in 2025. And we're not on target to do that at all. And that's really concerning because the steps that we take now in reducing emissions is what's going to determine how much warming the planet is going to experience in decades to come. So scientists have said that really, I think, I don't know who put 2030 in there, but we really have until 2030 to really tackle our emissions in a significant way. And by doing so, we will avert some of the worst case scenarios of climate change. So let's just dive into some of these tactics that the report talked about in terms of distracting consumers away from, making changes. So meat and dairy industries, they come up with a lot of greenwashing tactics, and they label their products as being climate friendly, natural, and an essential part of a healthy diet. And what this study says is that it's creating like a collective placebo effect for consumers. So they believe that, you know, meaningful action is being taken when things are actually getting worse. So, you know, the meat and dairy industries continue to expand, but because of their labeling and their messaging, we think that when we're buying these products, that they're behind the scenes actually, you know, making things, you know, better. And in fact, that they're not. And one of the ways that they do this distraction is through social media influencers. So the meat and dairy industry knows that especially Gen Z are very concerned about climate change, and that's understandable, right? Because they're the ones who are going to be living on, you know, a boiling planet if we don't change our habits, and that includes how we're producing food. And so the meat and dairy industries hire social media influencers to attract Gen Zs to their products, claiming that they're healthier and better for the environment when they're not. And so, you know, in high consuming countries like the United States, we're already eating way more meat and dairy than is recommended. Yet we're still targeting Americans and trying to convince them to eat even more and more animal-based foods. In fact, you know, in my lifetime, the average American is eating 58 pounds more meat per year today than they did when I was born. And since 1970, the average American is eating 30 pounds more cheese per year than they did. So just over the course of my lifetime, we've seen a dramatic increase in the consumption of animal-based foods, not because it's good for us or it's healthy, but because it helps the meat and dairy industry make record profits, right? So, you know, in this study looked at 22 different meat and dairy companies across 4 different continents. And only 15 of the 22 have some kind of net zero targets. And however, none of the companies meet the standards set by the UN expert group, which you know, certifies that these targets, that companies are actually living up to reducing their emissions. So none of them are doing it, but 15 are there's only 15 of the 22 who are saying that they're doing something. And I thought it was interesting, out of all the 22 companies, there's only basically 2 companies that seem like they're moving in the right direction. And that was Dannon and Nestle. So Dannon, this is a quote from the study. It says, Dannon leads the pack when it comes to the scientific integrity of its target, as it roughly aligns to a 1.5 degree trajectory. It's the only company in the sector with a specific commitment to cut methane emissions by 30% by 2030 and a shift to plant-based products. So only one company, Dannon, is doing this, and they're the only company that's saying that they're working to shift to plant-based foods. Most of the companies, meat and dairy industries, are not saying that they're going to shift away from their products. Now, just like I said earlier, the fossil fuel industry, you know, they sometimes support renewable energy. That's so that they can claim that they're diversifying their portfolio, right, and that they're being greener. When in fact it's kind of a smokescreen. They're really not doing that much with renewable energies, but it gives them a bit of cover. And the same thing with animal-based foods like the meat and dairy industry. They may have some plant-based products that they will create, but by and large, they're still in the business of selling meat and dairy, and that's not going to change anytime soon, and unless we demand that they do. And there's a lot of levers and tools that we can use to help facilitate and to help accelerate that transition. So we've talked a little bit about the distracting tactics, and so what about some of the delay tactics? Does anybody, if you read the study, do you remember any of the tactics that these companies are using to delay being regulated? First of all, I want to kind of backtrack a little bit and go to, why is it that do you think that an industry that is creating so much environmental degradation and such a polluting industry is by and large subsidized by the government and not regulated at all by the government? And what do you think leads to that scenario? And it talked about it in the conclusion of in the executive summary, and it talks about it in the report too. It's a term that I only learned about maybe in the last year or so, and it's called agricultural exceptionalism. So it's this idea that we cannot regulate farmers. We need food to eat, right? So we can't tell farmers how to produce the food that they're producing. It's a very hands-off approach. So it's this idea that for some reason farmers are exempt. They're the only industry that is exempt from being regulated or having the government tell them, what they can and can't do as far as polluting the planet. And so this idea of agricultural exceptionalism is very problematic because it continues to mean that it's a very hands-off approach to the problem. And another thing that this article and report brings out is that for so many of the meat and dairy industries, what they're promoting are techno fixes, right? They're very high-tech solutions that have not been proven. They're not, and they tout them as being like a silver bullet, like it's going to, take care of all the problems. But they're always high-tech solutions. The meat and dairy industry never comes out and says, we're going to tackle our emissions by reducing our herds, right? It's all about maximizing efficiency and coming up with technological fixes to their emission problem. It's never, they never voluntarily say we're going to reduce our herds, right? They're never going to want to do that. And that is, extremely problematic because, as we know, climate scientists say that, we need to make a shift, a dietary shift, that, emissions alone from animal agriculture is going to prevent us from reaching our climate goals of 1.5 degrees Celsius. So that business as usual food production is going to doom our reaching our goals, even if we were able to decarbonize energy production and the transportation sector. So we have to change how we're producing food and the foods. Not really how we're producing food, because that kind of plays into the idea that there's techno fixes and things we can do that will reduce emissions. We need to change the foods that we're growing to more plant-based foods. And then some of the derailing tactics that is used by the meat and dairy industry. So they spend millions of dollars on political campaigns and lobbying. So I learned this as I was researching my book, that the meat and dairy industries between the year 2000 and 2019 in the United States, the meat and dairy industry spent $200 million only on lobbying Congress against environmental and climate change legislation. $200 million. And it's probably a drop in the bucket of their revenues, right? But still, that's a lot of money. And they were very successful, right? Because between 2000 and 2019, there was no legislation aimed in the United States at curbing our greenhouse gas emissions. So, and there's been very little regulation of animal agriculture. And another interesting thing is that relative to each company's revenue, Tyson Chicken spends like 33% more on political campaigns than ExxonMobil. So what happens is the meat and dairy industries are very involved in political campaigns, getting elected officials in office who are favorable to their industries. And then once they're in office, they're lobbying them to prevent them from enacting legislation that would curb their ability to, make money. So this is one of the ways that they derail change. And another one is there's a revolving door. So people come in and out of the industry into political positions, then back into industry. So there's this kind of revolving door where people from the industry end up in office to help control the legislation, and they come back out, and that's kind of a problem that we see that entrenches the industry's interests in at the highest level. And these industries also, because they spend so much money, they have a lot of meetings with political leaders, high elected officials. They're able to have these meetings, and I think in the report it said like I can't remember now. There's so many details in there, but there's like 600 high level meetings with elected officials that the industry was able to have because of this revolving door and this cozy relationship that the meat and dairy industries have with our government. And then another thing that they talk about is, it's an all carrots and no sticks approach. So because of this revolving door, people who get in office, they want to say that the industry is going to voluntarily, we're already making changes, and it's happening. So just you don't need to regulate us because it's happening. And then so it's an all carrots approach and no sticks. And one of the amazing things that this report shows is that we already know that the meat and dairy industries get a lot of subsidies from the government, right? And because that's how we have affordable meat and dairy, is because of government subsidies, using our tax dollars to fund them. And those subsidies are just off limits. When we're talking about trying to get the industry to reform itself, it's never the government doesn't use these subsidies as a stick or a carrot to try to incentivize the industry to change. Those subsidies are kind of off limits. They never get discussed. But when the industry is trying to make a change, like these techno fixes that I talked about, they expect the government to fund those studies. So they're already getting all this money from the government, but hey, if you want us to reduce our methane emissions, you got to fund that study, fund that research, because we're not going to spend our money on doing that. So and that's very problematic. And then the report talks about just the tiniest amount of money that they spend on research and development, and we don't really know how much of that is going towards, because they don't disclose it, we don't know how much of that money is going to actually trying to reduce emissions. And then I also want to say that, so much of this report is talking about greenhouse gas emissions, and specifically they talk a lot about methane, but there are a lot of other huge problems with the meat and dairy industry that it's not related only, their problems are much more than greenhouse gas emissions. I mean, we're talking about land use, water use, environmental degradation, biodiversity loss. The beef industry is still the #1 driver of deforestation on the planet. And, that is, when we chop down forests, we are losing our ability to store carbon. We're killing nature. Those animals that live on that land, they can't just relocate somewhere else, because all animals are territorial. So you can't just take animals from land that you've cleared, and those animals don't just run into the nearby forest and set up shop. That's not how nature works. So we're really talking about an industry that is not only fueling climate change, but it's doing a huge amount of damage environmentally. And so with that, it's kind of an overview, I think, of some of the main points that were in the report. And like I said, I encourage you to, if you can, to download it, take a look at it. And I don't know if now we can just open it up to if anyone has any questions. I have a list of some questions here, but if anyone has questions, comments, thoughts, what you any takeaways that you have from hearing me talk or having read the executive summary or the report, now would be a good time. We can open it up. Yes, Frank.
Are there any legislators, congressmen or senators that are supporting emissions control through regulating the dairy and meat industries and fertilizer industry, and that we can support?
Mm-hmm. Well, definitely we have allies, but there are very few. Cory Booker in New Jersey is definitely an ally, and he would be a person who can bring about some positive change. I was at the Animal and Vegan Advocacy Summit in Washington, D.C. last May. And I'm sorry, I can't remember his name, but he's a congressman from Denver, and he actually spoke at the summit about a lot of these issues. So I think there are members who are becoming more and more aware of the problem, but we need to demand, I guess, that our elected officials look out for the good of the public rather than these industries. And we need to, vote not only with our dollars at the grocery store in supporting, plant-based foods, but also at the ballot, because this year is a really critical year. In 2024, I think half the population is voting in elections. And of course, we have an election here in the United States, and it's very the two parties and the two candidates have a very different approach to the climate and the environment. And so I encourage people that when they do vote, to look at the party, the candidate, and the platform that is interested in working on these issues, because there are more and more candidates out there who realize that we need to tackle emissions and we need to rein in the meat and dairy industries, as well as fossil fuels. Anybody else?
Yes.
Any thoughts? Yes, Robert, and then
My thought is this: how do we, the public, out lobby the lobbyists? In other words, to get the politicians to do the right thing. And I'm also looking at this from a global perspective, not an American citizen. And you're talking if this is a USA problem. No, this is a global problem. And unless we get people to work at the global level to do the right thing, we're not going to make any progress. So, I mean, I admire what you're doing. But, a group of 14 people to get the attention of the government. We, the public, could easily raise 200, 300, 400 million, $1 billion to lobby for the right thing, to get the politicians to do the right thing. We have to step up. The politicians you have in your country and I have in my country are not prepared to make decisions because the public has not given them the authority to do stuff. They listen to the people who can provide them with the money to get elected, and getting elected and supporting their party is more important than the health of humanity and the individual health. I think an example at Cornell University silenced a professor who was promoting, teaching about a whole food plant-based diet that makes an amazing difference in the health of communities and our whole humanity and the individual health. But as you pointed out, that meat and dairy industry silenced him, silenced the university. Well, told him to get this guy out of there. He's making waves. And so, Anyway, it's a big issue. Everybody's trying, but we use some different approaches. Having a whole bunch of NGOs trying individually to solve the problem, it's not working. So can we get creative and come up with some better ways of tackling it?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Thank you, Robert, for that perspective and sharing that. Yeah, I agree. The number of people who identify as being vegan hasn't changed much in recent years. So, this movement of trying to get people to become vegan or 100% plant-based, doesn't seem like it's working. But I think what is working and what I get excited about is that there are a growing number of people who are interested in reducing their consumption of animal-based foods. So more and more people are identifying themselves as flexitarians or climatarians, eating for the health of the planet. And I think that's just not in the United States. It's happening more and more globally. And I think one of the fear-mongering tactics that the meat and dairy industry uses, and some politicians too, is they say, "Oh, so and so is coming for your hamburger." You know, they've said that about President Biden. He's coming for your hamburger, and so that puts fear into people, thinking that, oh, the Democrats or whatever party, they're trying to take my meat away from me, and so that is another tactic that they use to instill fear in people. But I do want to say, Robert, that there have been some, like when I went to the Animal Vegan and Advocacy Summit, it was very inspiring to see people working at policy level and institutional levels to bring about changes. And so, for instance, there's the United States Humane Society. I had kind of felt bad because they tend to focus so many of their promotional materials on cats and dogs, right? And not really so much on farmed animals. And if you're going to really work to end suffering, why not go with farmed animals? Because there's billions of those. So anyway, what I learned is that the United States Humane Society is working behind the scenes to radically increase plant-based options at universities across America. So they're doing a lot behind the scenes to nudge students towards a more plant-based way of eating. And then something that happened just recently in Denmark. I don't know if you heard about this, Robert. I'm not sure where you live, but in Denmark, there was just a historic agreement signed by the government and farmers, saying that farmers are going to be taxed on the emissions of their animals, starting in, I'm not sure if it starts in 2028, or I'm not sure what year, but it's coming up very soon that they've reached an agreement that the farmers are going to start being taxed. So that's kind of a stick and not a carrot. So I think that's, those types of things can help raise awareness, can change policies. And, when you have someone in a position of authority, things can happen that can make a big difference and can start changing people's awareness. So one example of this I like to share is like in 2022, Burger King in Austria, when people would go up to buy a burger and place their order, the person working at the register would say, "Do you want normal or with meat?" And so they were normalizing the non-meat version and making the consumer think about, do I really want meat or not? And I thought that was a brilliant strategy to help raise awareness and to nudge people into thinking, oh, do I really need that meat? Or maybe I can just do a plant-based today. And that's not going to be making a radical change, but it is a step in the right direction, and it helps raise awareness in the consumer's mind. And there's also a organization here in the United States, and I'm sure there's others elsewhere, called Greener by Default. So West Hollywood just passed an ordinance. They're saying that all of the food at their city events are all going to be plant-based by default. And people can order meat if they want, but the default is going to be plant-based. And this is not because they're concerned about animal welfare or people's health. This is because it's part of their goal of becoming, carbon neutral and lowering their carbon emissions. And so I think changes are happening. I'm encouraged by it. I do find that engaging with this topic on a daily basis can be overwhelming and sometimes depressing, but I try to look for what a friend of mine calls glimmers. I look for those things that inspire me to realize, change is happening. Maybe not as quickly as I would like, but it is happening. So Rita, thank you for being so patient while I ramble on there. Please share your thoughts with us.
Okay, I just did a quick search, and Colorado Governor Jared Polis is very pro fewer meats and looking to support organizations that are gaining more profits from not supporting the meat fish industry. And then there is a list of current American politicians that are vegan. I put that link in the chat.
All right.
And
Wow, cool. Thank you.
on the point of education in medical schools about nutrition, Dr. Greg Feinsinger, who's a retired family practice physician who's been a proponent of plant-based lifestyle for a number of years, he and his wife have created a fund at the University of Colorado that will ensure that first-year medical students will get a class in nutrition in their first year, which is unheard of. And so hopefully there will be more universities and organizations with medical schools that will look at that as a precedent.
Wonderful. Yeah, thanks for sharing those resources and in the chat there. So that's great. I'll be sure to check those out. Any other thoughts about the report or what we're talking about here today, the new merchants of doubt?
Oh, the other thing I wanted to point out is yesterday when Robert F. Kennedy announced that he was withdrawing from running for president and supporting the former President Trump. One of the reasons that he pointed out is he wants to make a shift in the chronic disease state in this country. He didn't specifically say he was promoting vegan or plant-based lifestyle, but he said he's definitely declared that as one of his platform issues that he wants to address, reversing the chronic illness in this country. It'll be interesting to see what are the details of that strategy.
Yeah. Cory Booker is been promoting food as medicine, and that's an approach that I think is in alignment with kind of what you're saying, Rita, is helping people see that their nutrition is medicine, and that it can really make a big difference. And some of these, chronic health conditions are non-communicable health conditions that are a result of our lifestyle and the foods that we're eating. And these are like hypertension and diabetes and things like that. And I really like, because of that, I'll mention that there's a group, it's a pilots program in Washington, D.C. And, maybe they're doing this elsewhere around the planet, I'm not sure. But doctors there are writing produce prescriptions. And so these are for their patients who are on Medicaid. So the doctors will write a prescription for whole fruits and vegetables that they can go to the grocery and get. I think it's like $125 a month or something like that, that they can get fresh produce. And it's making a big difference in the lives of people who are enrolled in this program. A lot of them are their health's improving and they're coming off medications. And, that's great. And that alone is enough reason to do it. But they're also finding that for every dollar they spend on these produce prescriptions, the government's saving $3 in healthcare costs. So there's also a financial incentive to it as well as a health benefit. So. Any other ideas percolating? So what role or responsibility in reducing the environmental impact of food systems? To what extent is it an individual responsibility, or is it a government, or is it a corporation? You know, how do you think this shift will happen? What will be driving the shift?
I think education is the big push behind this change needing to happen, and starting in schools with children and making sure that good fresh food is available for breakfasts and lunches for the schools that are providing that, and that along with providing the food, there's education about why that's a good way to go, because then kids go home and tell their parents, oh, this is what I learned today. This is what we had to eat for lunch, and I want to do more of that.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, education is important for sure. Especially, you know, these the derailing or just some of these tactics that the meat and dairy industries use. For instance, like with methane, you know, they fund just like big tobacco, they fund studies at universities to support, you know, what it is that that they're pushing. You know, so like one of the things that has really been prominent in recent years is this idea that methane from cows is part of a biogenic cycle, and so they're not contributing to climate change. And so this is a position that the industry is pushing and pushing and pushing, to the point that, you know, it's convinced a lot of people that yeah, that the emissions from cows aren't important, and that we don't need to address those at all, which isn't true at all. I mean, if we want to, you know, drastically start cooling the planet, then what we want to do is we want to look at the greenhouse gases that are the most potent, right? And we want to try to reduce those as quickly as possible. And methane is one of the more potent greenhouse gases that there is. And nitrous oxide as well is almost 300 times more efficient at trapping heat into the atmosphere than carbon dioxide. So nitrous oxide is a powerful greenhouse gas that comes from agriculture, and a lot of it from animal agriculture, as well as methane. So that's why looking at these, reducing the emissions from these gases is so important. And it's rarely talked about in the media. So we're kind of running short on time. So as we kind of wind up, you know, I do want to say that, you know, conversations like these, I think, are important, and we need to have conversations not only among ourselves, you know, but also with other people, our family and friends, and so we can counter some of these narratives by the meat and dairy industry. And so I think the report, the New Merchants of Doubt, is so important, because it's full of information that that shows, you know, that the meat and dairy industries are what they're doing, and how these narratives are fooling people into thinking that change is happening, you know, when it's not. So that's why I think reports like this are so powerful, because it disrupts that narrative. And when we learn the truth, and we learn that, you know, it is important that we reduce methane emissions from cows, that it's that the biogenic carbon cycle that the industry peddles is just a greenwashing tactic to show that to make people think that there's not a problem. It's kind of a like the article said, it's like this placebo effect. And so we can also share the report on social media, share it with our friends. There's things that we can do as individuals that can help raise, and like Rita said, educate. And education is something that is so important for all of us. We're here today so that we can learn and gain a deeper appreciation for what's happening and how we can bring about positive change. Do anybody else have any thoughts before we wrap up? Michelle, hello.
Hi there. Hi, Michelle
Hi.
St. John. I'm based in England, here
Oh,
in
hi.
Cheshire,
Welcome.
so different time zone.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think what you're saying about education is really important because obviously, I think here what we can try and do is try and use the laws for the rights of the child. So, for example, the United Nations rights of the child now, there's a general comment, I think it's called 26, where they've got a right to climate education.
Great.
Things like that to try and look, because at the moment, I mean, I've got an educational initiative in the UK called Veganism in Education, and I'm trying to get veganism into the curriculum because vegans have rights in UK and European law. So under the Equality Act, I'm trying to use them to advance animal rights, so the vegan rights of the child and the parent to be represented within the school ethos, inclusivity. But it's
Nice.
amazing how much the animal agriculture industry has a hold on actual materials,
Yes.
producing them, gets funded by the government. Even now, with even animal welfare organizations, they're doing educational materials on animal welfare, and they're being funded by DEFRA, which is, a government department for Environment and Farming and Rural Affairs. So it's
Yeah.
looking at those and exposing those connections that don't make it broad, balanced, and pluralistic when it comes to the right of a child to have a balanced education on animal and climate issues. So I think looking to the
That's
law
wonderful.
sometimes is a
Yeah.
good way of challenging and promoting animal issues, the environment, climate, sustainability, because it's certainly not fairly represented at the moment. It's like the silent part of the education. They talk about fossil fuels and plastics in the sea, but they don't talk about, like, the biggest polluter in the oceans is the fishing nets. There seems to be this, hidden agenda of the animal agricultural, effect in climate change. So I'm trying to address that, but it's
Thank you.
step by step. Okay, but
Thank
wonderful
you,
work. I loved
Michelle.
reading through the article and the parallels as well with the smoking lobbies and everything else. Okay, thanks.
No, thank you, Michelle. Thank you for your work. And I do agree. I think we're seeing more and more lawsuits against the government here in the United States for because a lot of the state constitutions are saying that citizens are guaranteed a healthy environment, right? But the government's not providing that. So more and more lawsuits are being done here in the United States, and I think that can help, like you said, bring about change, and hopefully. Anybody else have a thought to share? I just will say that we can continue this conversation on WeDidIt.health, the Eco Vegans Passion Pod is there, so I encourage people to go over to wedidit.health, create a free account, and join the Eco Vegan Passion Pod. And that way we can continue this discussion. And we try to have a meeting once a month here on Zoom to usually on a specific topic. And we're going to be hopefully bringing in some other guest speakers in the future to cover topics of their expertise. So, keep an eye out for that. You can also find me on Instagram and Facebook, Stuart Waldner, and I'm an author of a book called Escape the Meatrix. And you can find that on Amazon, and my website, stuartwaldner.com. And I can put that in the chat here real fast. And yeah, you can reach out to me, check out my website and my book, join my email list so we can stay in touch. That would be great. And yeah, I think that about does it, unless anyone has any other thoughts they'd like to share before we sign off. Okay, well, thank you all so much for being here. It's been great to spend this time together with like-minded, like-hearted individuals like yourselves. And, I know that it sometimes gets overwhelming to think about the issues that we're facing. And sometimes we feel like, or I feel like, there's not much that not much difference one person can make. But, I think of corporations and the industries, want us to feel that way. And there's a term that I learned called weaponized hopelessness. And so the powers that be want to maintain the status quo, and they want us to feel hopeless and helpless to change that. And that's part of their tactics of derailing and delaying, is to make us feel like we're not empowered, that our voice doesn't matter, that we don't have agency, and we can't bring about change. And so that's another one of their tactics. So I would just ask people to not fall victim to this idea. I know I struggle with it myself, but to not let the powers that be weaponize our hopelessness, because that plays into their hands, and that's how they are able to maintain the status quo, by making us feel like we don't have the ability to demand for change and to bring about change. So I encourage everyone to stay strong and support one another, and to eat plants. So I love you all, and hope to see you again sometime soon.